All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Debbie Sousa, and on behalf of the Mass Mortgage Bankers Association, I am so excited that you are spending the next couple of hours with us talking about HMDA, commercial HMDA, that is. I am so pleased that we have just an amazing panel of speakers, and we are being led by Thomas Golden, who is the CRA officer at Rockland Trust. And so without further ado, I think I'm just going to turn it over to Tom and get us started.
Awesome. Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Golden. So I am the CRA officer at Rockland Trust. I oversee CRA, fair lending, commercial compliance at the first line, which includes commercial HMDA. So I came from the FDIC. I know a lot of people in the audience have seen me on the other side of the table. So sorry for everything I did to you during the exams. It's nice to be on this side of the table for a change. I'm just going to kind of go through the list of our speakers and have them introduce themselves. So I'll start with Alison from Hometown Financial Group.
Hi, my name's Alison Tower. I'm the Vice President of Compliance and CRA Officer for Hometown Financial Group. We're a multi-bank holding company that includes 3 individual banks. That's Abington Bank in Eastern Mass, Bank Hometown in Central Mass, and BankESB in Western Mass, where I live. So thank you for having me.
Okay, Alison. And Bethany?
Hi, I'm Bethany Bewsher. I'm the Vice President Compliance Officer at Easton Savings Bank. Happy to be here.
Our last panelist is Sarah. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sarah Hansen. I'm the Operations Manager for Quilty Associates. We're a consulting company. We do HMDA reviews, data integrity testing, omissions testing. We'll also review your HMDA procedures, and we offer training as well for your staff if you feel like you need it. So we try and make sure that you guys are getting the most out of us being there. So we try and make sure that we tailor your needs to whatever issues you found in your previous HMDA examination reviews. We kind of come in and try and help you figure out all of those issues.
Awesome. Thank you. And logistically, for everybody in the audience, if you do have questions, I have the chat window open, my computer as well. So if you have questions as we're going through, please just throw them in the chat and we'll try to address them. For the next about hour and change, we have some set questions. We're going to kind of follow alphabetical order. If you're in the panel, kind of know where we're going to land next. But again, if you have questions, throw them in the chat, or you can direct message me if you don't feel like asking in the large group. But with that, I will start with you, Alison. Given that most of your LARs, all 3 of them, will be comprised of non-commercial entries, by number anyways, what does the commercial deal process looks like in terms of HMDA, given their enhanced complexity, and how much time, percentage-wise, do you think you've spent fixing those versus fixing residential or consumer HMDA entries?
Sure. So I anticipated this question because it is not proportionate at all. So I actually went to our LAR for the year and I calculated less than 1% of the loans on our LARs are commercial. And when I say that, I don't mean the business purpose flag. I mean truly out of the commercial lending area, just to be clear. So because we do some investment properties on the residential side of house, which would still be that business purpose commercial. So not including those, just the commercial area, it's less than 1%, 0.7% if you want to get really specific about it. And that said, I would say we spend about 5 to 10% of our time scrubbing those loans because of the complexity. It's just more gray on the commercial side. There's more room for interpretation. There's more complexity in the deal. Sometimes you have multiple pieces of collateral, and you have a great big long loan presentation or credit memo or whatever you call it at your institution to pull information out of, as opposed to the residential side where you have a neat and clean 1003 or just standard document. So it is absolutely a disproportionate amount of time spent reviewing that very small handful of loans.
Sorry, about follow up on that. Is you talked about a credit memo. Is there your aggregation of the HMDA LAR from the commercial world all manual, or is there any automatic feed for any of the data points?
So we use LoanVantage as a commercial loan origination system. So we do automate pulling those from there to our HMDA data management software. So there is some automation, but garbage in, garbage out. So we are scrubbing 100% of those fields every time.
Do you do it quarterly, monthly, or
We do it
periodic?
monthly. No, we scrub all of the loans on a monthly basis because it's just easier. When we were smaller and we had less volume, we did it on a quarterly basis. But it was hard to manage doing that many loans. Just to give you an idea, and I think everybody's in the same boat. 2023 was a relatively slow year compared to 2020 and 2021. But we had about, I'd say 2,000 LAR entries between the three banks this year.
Is there any consistency in fields that require additional scrub or focus between the three different LARs?
Yeah, so what I would say is it's not the same at each of the three banks, and that's primarily because BankESB is not a partial exempt reporter. So scrubbing all of the fields, as where Bank Hometown and Abington Bank are subject to the partial exemption. And actually, luckily for me, we originated less than 25 HMDA loans at each of those banks this year. So we're going to non-reporters starting in 2024 for those two, which will make life a lot easier. But going back, it's a lot easier to scrub a LAR that has more than half of the fields exempt. Otherwise, the fields that aren't exempt are consistent. We try to align our processes, and we have defined source documents for each field so that you should be able to follow it along quite easily. Emphasis on should.
That's the key, right? Bethany, I would kind of punt it to you now with the same question, given that I believe Northeastern's LAR is largely based on residential consumer home equity, not commercial. How much of your LAR is commercial based, and then what percentage of time do you spend scrubbing that versus the other two?
Yeah, so our commercial volume is significantly lower than our residential volume, which I think is the same for for everybody here. In 2023, we will be reporting around 450 loans total, and about 50 of those will be commercial. So not a large portion of our LAR at all, but given the complexity of the commercial deals, I probably split my time evenly between residential and commercial HMDA as far as monitoring is concerned. I'm the second line, so I only do a percentage of residential loans. I do 10% originated and 20% non-originated, unless I find something that seems to be systemic. But I do 100% of commercial. So the volume actually ends up being roughly the same in a given quarter when I'm looking at it. So yeah, it's disproportionate when you consider the number of commercial loans versus the number of residential loans, but the time spent between the two is roughly the same.
Do you think you ever have any aspirations to get the 10 and 20% as applicable from residential over to commercial, or do you think they're always going to be doing commercial?
I don't think I will ever have a degree of comfort with HMDA to trust not looking at 100% of commercial loans.
Do you think you'll have any expanded scope or an additional or larger LAR, I guess, once 1071 comes in on the other side of the table, where deals might be changed up and how they're categorized a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just going to be twice as much work, honestly. I think there will be 100% scrub for 1071 and then 100% scrub for HMDA. I know that their HMDA reportable loans won't be reportable for 1071, but it's just gonna duplicate the work. It's all that's gonna happen.
Are you looking at any systems that would collect similar data for either 1071 or HMDA?
So we actually also use LoanVantage. We probably don't use LoanVantage to the extent that we could, because I know that for our commercial reporting, we are manually pulling the information out of the system and then importing that into QuestSoft. But again, our volume is very, very low. In a quarter, we're probably reporting 10 or 12 commercial HMDA loans. It's not a significant number. So we are exploring LoanVantage and, learning about what the changes will be with 1071. And hopefully at that point, if there's any automation for 1071, we can also leverage that for HMDA.
Awesome. Okay. Alison, I'm going to come back to you with a kind of a follow-up question about the three institutions. given that there's some other banks in the Commonwealth that have started to adopt the holding company model with multiple institutions underneath, how difficult is it to balance the whether or not you have a LAR, I guess now, right? Because two of them don't, and collecting and changing processes between institutions to make that all work?
Sure. So what I would say is obviously, even though we're not going to have a LAR next year, we still have HMDA responsibilities because that is a very low threshold for reportability, right? 25 HMDA reportable originations is your threshold. So we still have to track them and make sure we don't cross back over into HMDA reportability. And if we do, make sure we're aware of it and we're ready to go. As far as alignment, so the key, I think, is having clear procedures and training, right? Reaching out to, we have 3 separate commercial departments. We have 1 consolidated residential department, so that makes it easier. But we have 3 separate commercial departments. And so I pull the lead CLA, who is the person at each bank responsible for collecting and scrubbing commercial HMDA. I pull the 3 of them together into meetings and have one conversation to make sure that we're all on the same page, so that you're not, reinventing the wheel or doing things differently. I think with HMDA in general, consistency is key.
I would agree. And I think, right, so having the consistent message outlined in advance is going to make that easier, particularly when there is difference of interpretation, which is where for Bethany and Alison, I'm going to bring up the 31 versus 32 conversation for the refinances. Alison, since you were just talking, can you talk about how you interpret cash out refinances on the commercial side, and then after you, Bethany, as well?
Yes. So we do not have any cash out refinances on the commercial side, because if you read the commentary, it talks about different pricing or different, not necessarily pricing, but could be different underwriting criteria that differentiates between a cash out versus a no cash out. That's very easy on the residential side where you're meeting secondary market standards. Freddie clearly defines what is a cash out versus a no cash out, or Fannie. Nothing like that exists on the commercial side. So what I would say is look at your credit writing guidelines and see if your bank specifically details, we will underwrite a cash out refinance this way, but a, no cash out refinance that way. If you have different criteria, you might have a difference in reporting. We do not. So every refinance, whether or not they're walking away with cash or not, is coded as a 31 refinance on the commercial side.
And for me, it's the same exact applicability. We don't report 32s for commercial lending.
Would either of you ever consider if a loan application came started through residential and then got kicked over to commercial for whatever reason, carrying over that 32, or once it makes that transition, it goes back to the 31?
For me, it would go back to the 31. We don't have that, a distinguished product in the commercial sector for cash out, so it would be a 31.
Okay.
Agreed.
All right. Sarah, I'm not ignoring you. Now I'm going to ask you a loaded question here.
That's okay. It's no problem. This is their time.
For now.
Yeah.
So here I have a larger question for you. Given that you get to see procedure, process, and error rates at a variety of institutions, can you share some of the mistakes or trends that you're kind of seeing across the bank space, both focusing on commercial, but as necessary, touch on residential home equity reporting?
Yeah, I did make some notes about some of the common mistakes and common areas that people are struggling with. The first one that I think is probably the most important and the one that I see most often is lack of documentation in the file. So, you send me your LAR, you've gone through it yourself, it's my turn to check, and the data on the LAR could be correct, but the documents that you're providing me to review the data on that LAR is not sufficient. So things will be missing. You'll tell me that I have to track something to this source document and that source document won't be there. So it just kind of brings up a lot of questions, and it's time consuming and it's confusing because I'm trying to figure out where that data is coming from, and the file doesn't really back that up. So that is one of the things that I find is most common with all the reviews that I do, is just the files not really having the information that we're looking for. Another one is, which has been mentioned, is the HMDA procedures. Everyone at this point should have HMDA procedures for their institution. The residential side always does. They're always, very good, very thorough. The commercial side does not hardly ever have them. And you don't have to make a completely separate, document for your HMDA procedures for commercial. You can add those little, bullet points that are specific to commercial in your HMDA procedures that you already have. So you don't have to start from scratch or anything like that. You just have to kind of make that a little more clear, so that when someone like myself comes in that does not work with you guys, doesn't know the deals, doesn't know how you operate, I can take that and I'm able to work through your loan without a lot of questions, because the more questions I have, the worse it's going to be. So you don't want me asking any questions. You want those procedures to be there and to be clear so that we can kind of like move through it. I have a couple other things. Do you want me to keep going, or do you?
Yep, absolutely.
I made notes. And, application date, which I know will probably be discussed here in some form during the program. But if you've been to one of these seminars before, you have heard that application date is an issue for commercial loans. It has been since, they needed to report HMDA. There's no, you guys can decide which source document you use to determine your application date. So that needs to be made clear in your procedures, and you have to be consistent with it, which is something that I find is people have a lot of problems with that. The application date is not taken consistently from the same documents. So that really is something that needs to be kind of cleaned up in a lot of places, just to make sure that it's always the same. You're not, applying this for this loan and this for this loan. It's just across the board. And the final thing I have is, and I think we'll probably talk about this more too, is the loan purpose. Loan purpose for commercial transactions is complicated because of the nature of the transactions. They can be involved, a little confusing, like has been mentioned, like a lot of gray areas. So I see most often an issue with reporting what a refinance is. So for the transaction, you have to be satisfying a dwelling secured lien for it to be a refinance. So if you have a deal and the borrower is taking 100% cash out, not satisfying a lien, and the cash is being used to like replenish capital, that is not a refinance. So you cannot code that as a refinance on your LAR. So stuff like that is things that I find that people struggle with. They just assume like, oh, well, that's a refinance, and it's really not. Also, I find that in order to report a loan as a purchase for HMDA reporting, the borrower needs to be purchasing a dwelling. They can't be purchasing a warehouse or a nail salon or something like that. So that is not if they're buying, a warehouse for storage, that's not a HMDA reportable loan. So that should not be on your LAR. And I find that sometimes that they are reported, so you're over-reporting the transactions that don't really qualify. So
I have a question on that one. How
kind of
often do you think you have institutions pulling those off of the LAR because of that misinterpretation?
It's the volume isn't high, but the frequency is pretty high. Like I will probably find one in every batch that I look at that shouldn't be on there.
Okay.
So it's not a high percentage of loans, but the frequency is pretty consistent.
So you're finding that during the validation, not during like omissions testing or
Right, during validation, yeah.
Can I just add on to that for a second? We see something similar, although not usually to buy a warehouse. I've trained them better than that at this point. However,
You'd be
a
surprised.
lot of times we see people say, "Oh, it's a purchase," because it's cash out to reimburse themselves for a purchase, which is not a purchase. You can only buy a property one time, and so we see that a lot on the commercial side, where maybe they paid cash because it was quick and they couldn't get the financing in time. But we see that a lot on the commercial side.
I think we do as well. With increasing frequency in this environment, I think when people are trying to get it done before rate changes, and then can't. Bethany, same with you?
Yeah, for sure. We see that a few times, where they're reimbursing themselves. I kind of laugh about it because I almost feel like in the commercial world, especially with the commercial lenders, and if there's commercial lenders on this call, please know that this is coming from all of the love in my heart. But we're not speaking the same language. The lingo over there when they are talking about a purchase or a refi or even an improvement loan does not necessarily mean what we need it to mean for HMDA purposes. One of the things while we're talking, I guess, kind of talking about purpose now, for purchases, a lot of times what I'll see is that somebody's refinancing a loan. And when I see that, my first question is, well, who's refinancing the loan? Because Bethany Bewsher might be the customer that's come to the bank that's, trying to take out this loan to refinance. But what we're not hearing from the commercial loan officer is that Bethany Bewsher is transferring title to Bethany Bewsher LLC at closing. And that now is no longer a refinance because we don't have a common borrower. That becomes a purchase for HMDA. And then to even make things more complicated, if I transfer title to Bethany Bewsher LLC before closing, it's not HMDA reportable unless we're using some of those proceeds for improvements to the dwelling. So like I said, the lingo, it's just we're not speaking the same language.
I'm getting some chat questions in the chat. All cash out isn't a refi. Is that what I'm hearing?
If they're not satisfied, they have to satisfy a lien with it.
Right, in order to make it a true refi.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And to be clear, they have to satisfy and replace. So I've seen that too, where they say, oh, but they're paying it down to zero, right? They're paying a line of credit down to zero. But unless they are paying off that lien and discharging it, that's not satisfying and replacing. It's paying a balance down. And you need to Bethany's point, you also need at least one borrower in common on the new lien and the existing lien for it to be a refi.
And you also can't be using that cash out to purchase another dwelling.
Or potentially in a future real estate investment of.
That's a whole different animal.
Yeah, entirely different. There's another question in the chat real quick that is there going to be a training on this or is this in the Q&A? I don't know which part of the FAQ this would be in, but at the end of this, there is a Q&A. So if you have specific questions, chat person, feel free to ask then. Sorry to derail you there, Sarah, for a minute.
Oh, that's okay. Those were the common things that I see most frequently when I'm doing the reviews. And it seems to be something that most places are struggling with. It's pretty consistent as far as like them not quite being able to get that on the right track. So I know there's all kinds of things that we could talk about as far as like common mistakes and everything. The commercial stuff is hard. So, but that is kind of the hot topics of what are the errors that I see and that I have to note and question and talk to people about on a regular basis.
On the note of establishing a metric, I guess, with the revised CRA rule that has specific criteria for responsiveness for large institutions, and there's a requirement for description of product. Do any of the three of you think that you will start seeing commercial products be developed to hit that CRA check mark that are also HMDA reportable? I'm seeing like an absolutely not face from Alison over here.
That sounds great. I think we seek to get them compliant in HMDA reporting before we would see a new, specific product for responsiveness. But a girl can dream.
Same. All right. The next question I have is for Bethany. For those of you that don't know, Bethany set up the commercial world for me over here at Rockland. So all the success I have in commercial, I'm going to put on Bethany. Having served at a very large institution like Rockland and now at Northeastern, is there anything that, other than general commercial HMDA specifically, that you see as a common theme between the two institutions in terms of areas for improvement?
Absolutely. And surprisingly, a lot. I think the two biggest themes that I noticed between the two institutions is, well, first of all, the manual reporting process that we have, right? The manual data aggregation. At Rockland, by the time I left, we were using reports to aggregate the data and, trying to use those reports to tell us what loans were HMDA reportable, or not even HMDA reportable, but what loans were secured by real estate and could be HMDA reportable. And we're not quite there here, but again, our volume is significantly less than what it was at Rockland. But everything is manual. Even using systems, everything's manual. Has to be 100% review because you can't rely on the data. As Alison said earlier, the garbage in, garbage out, right? We can't rely on what's going into the system, so we're doing a manual review. But then on the flip side of that, I also find that training is incredibly difficult for frontline staff in both cases. With Rockland, the geographical footprint was much larger. There were over 100 branches. There were several lending centers. And so you've got like a lending center in Boston or in the Fall River area that does a lot of HMDA loans. And those folks might have a good handle on it. But then you go down the Cape where they don't have so many. They have a ton of flood loans, but not as many commercial HMDA loans. So trying to train somebody who does HMDA sporadically, maybe not even every year, to get it right is just very difficult. And here, we have much fewer staff, and again, the smaller volume, but because of that smaller volume, we don't do HMDA as often. And so you're trying to get staff to remember, oh, hey, first of all, to identify that they've got a HMDA loan, but then to remember all of the different fields and where it's all got to come from. And so it can be very difficult to wrap your arms around it and get it under control, no matter the size of your institution.
I'm glad you brought up a flood side regulation. So do you ever use the opportunity when looking at a flood loan to see if it's HMDA applicable and verify that it's there to kind of feed two birds with one stone?
Yeah, I do things, both sides. If I'm looking at a HMDA loan and I notice something flood related, I might just take a note of that for when I do my flood review to make sure it's in there. Yeah.
All right, now we're going to talk application versus completed application, I think. So Alison, could you talk about how you define application versus completed application for the commercial world and how the three institutions came to that conclusion?
Sure. So for application versus completed application, first I would say completed application for HMDA purposes, not completed application for ACOA purposes.
100%.
They're two very different things. I think it was Sarah who said, we're allowed to define what an application is for ourselves. This is one of those areas where banks are, you spell it out, you decide. The regulation does not spell it out for you. Within reason, you have some latitude. We do not use a paper application. I don't know how many banks are still using paper applications on the commercial side. We don't even have an online application for the commercial side. So it was a battle for sure to determine when do you have a completed application for HMDA. But as I mentioned, we do use LoanVantage. There is an application date in LoanVantage. And so we use the system. When it's boarded to LoanVantage with the application date is what we report for HMDA. There is a way in the system that you can enter a prospect. So if a loan is entered as prospect, that is not a HMDA date. It only moves to an application when it becomes a live app in the system. And that is consistent across all three of our banks.
Okay. That they're using LoanVantage as well. Do you follow a similar process?
Sort of. So we still heavily rely on our credit approval memo in order to determine our application date. We take the date of the credit approval memo as our completed app date, and that's the date we report for HMDA. And we do that now because that we do consistently. We still have some work to be done on differentiating between completed app and application date. So for now, in order to maintain that consistency and get it right every time, we're using the completed app of our credit approval memo that our underwriters draft.
Is it a manual?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to say, I think that point is really important, is especially when you have your HMDA procedures, write your HMDA procedures and do that how you actually function. You know, like don't say, oh, we take the application date from this document when you don't actually really take it from that document. You take it from your credit proposal. You know, don't try and reinvent the wheel here. If this is the way that you operate on a regular basis, just make it simple for yourselves. Don't try and pull the application date from this other place. If you always internally use that application date from the credit report for your credit proposal, then use it for HMDA. You know, it doesn't have to be something special for HMDA. It can be the same. And commercial HMDA is difficult enough, so just make it as easy for yourselves as you can.
I do have a question from somebody in the chat. How do you get joint intent sign off in LoanVantage? How do you document this?
We don't do it in LoanVantage. We have it documented on a separate piece of paper.
Same thing for us.
Hopefully that answers that question. Okay, completed app, question done. So this
I
one
didn't know
goes.
we had to be ready for other regulations today, man. Next we're going to be asking flood questions and.
You haven't even got to the worst part of this yet. You wait till I get down to APR later. So this one, the next question I have goes to all three of you. You can answer. Whoever wants to answer first, have at it. One thing we seem to see here, particularly with commercial loans, is misinterpretation of that purpose field, like we talked about earlier. Do you all reevaluate the definition of that with any frequency, or what does remedial training look like when you identify consistent issues with that?
I'll take a stab at that one first, I guess. I mean, we don't really reevaluate it. We have it kind of defined for how we're going to report for HMDA. You know, similar to what Sarah just said, we have a process that we follow. We do it consistently every time. So we try to stick to that as much as possible. With commercial, what's difficult is those anomalies, those things that like are just totally out in left field. You've got somebody who's reimbursing themselves for a purchase, but they're also doing a home improvement and it's secured by a barn that they're turning into a house. I mean, they can be so complicated. So I think, you know, as far as dealing with that and dealing with purpose as it can be difficult to manage, the big thing is, like we used to say this at Rockland Trust, is not managing to the exception, right? So following consistent procedures every single time. And when you have those one-offs, not changing a full process that's vetted and works to make sure that you don't miss the one time that a loan didn't fit the mold. So yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, we kind of deal with those weird ones as they come in, but we try to follow a consistent approach every single time.
What would remedial training look like for this? I would start first and foremost always with the waterfall, right? Define what each purpose is, then go through the waterfall, which is, you know, purpose trumps refinance, which trumps home improvement, which trumps other, which on the commercial side is not reportable. If you have another purpose, commercial purpose loan, it's not a HMDA reportable loan. And then I make sure I have examples. And if I have gathered examples over a period of time that were actual ones where they got it wrong, I pull them out. I don't say who got them wrong. And it's not about putting anybody on the spot. It's just about using our mistakes to learn from them and move forward. I think having real examples and making up, you know, funny scenarios that are memorable helps too, right? It's the less boring you can make your example, the right, instead of using Sally and Jack, make sure you use people in your bank, because then they remember, oh yeah, Ryan, he got that vacation home and it was application X, Y, and Z. So I try to make it relatable and as engaging and funny as compliance can be.
So I have a question on that though. Do you give that just to the particular individual that filled out the fields, or is it to all commercial staff, and what frequency is that kind of shared?
So yeah, so we do commercial HMDA so everybody gets HMDA training that touches HMDA annually through BAI, our online training platform. If I'm noticing a lot of mistakes, not just the one-off mistake here and there, but it seems that our performance standards have slipped a little, I will do a live training where I'm either soup to nuts HMDA, or just pulling out the hot button issues? What are we getting wrong, or emerging issues? Because even though the reg hasn't changed in a while, there are new interpretations. I think we saw something with property location come out of the CFPB last year, and that threw some people for a loop. But I would pull them all together, and I would do that training live to the team. That doesn't necessarily mean in person. To Bethany's point, you could have branches all over the state. Teams or Zoom or GoToMeeting is just as good.
I know Bethany dropped, but so Alison, do you save those like funny scenarios in any central repository for either for future training purposes, or the examiners come in and say, hey, how come you do it this way? Well, this is the time that we did that, and that's where we landed.
We save everything. So we save the trainings, our learning. Once we present something, I try to record it for anybody that's absent that day. I also make sure it gets over to our learning and development team, and they archive it so that if ever an examiner were saying, show us your HMDA training, we've got the PowerPoint presentation. We might even have a live recording and any handouts that were given out. And that's the other thing. I'm big on handouts. I'm big on job aids. We've talked about procedures, but I think it's important too to have things that are really easy to use. If you hand your commercial loan department, 25 pages of HMDA procedures, they're not going to read it. If you hand them a checklist and you make it really simple, it's more likely that they're going to use it. And I'll give an example. Since you've talked a little bit about CRA and 1071, one thing that we were seeing a lot of in the beginning was people just struggled to say, oh, is this HMDA reportable, or is this CRA reportable? Is this a community development loan? And we created an interactive flowchart that you actually can click on the things and it guides you to the right answer. And so you would have to be trying really hard in order to get the wrong answer. You just have to answer yes, no questions, and it will tell you exactly what you need.
So how many yes, no questions do you think exist on that to get to the right answer?
So 10? It's not about the field. It's just whether or not it's HMDA. Yeah. I think there's probably 10 or 20 to get through the whole thing.
So like less than a minute to answer it to get to a conclusion.
It's not a lot. Obviously, the further down the pipeline. So if you get to HMDA, it ends because it's not CRA if it's HMDA.
Right.
But if it's not HMDA and you get to CRA, it's going to take you a little while longer. If it's not that, and then you go to community development, right? So if you go through all three of the fields, which it will only do if you haven't already arrived at an answer earlier, it will take 3 minutes or less.
So when you say it's interactive, if you're comfortable sharing, where is that housed or who developed it? Is it just like on the SharePoint?
So we have it, we have an internal intranet, and we have that posted to we call it Divine, our intranet, and it's out there under the learning. So they click on it. We taught them where the resource was. They click on it and it opens up this interactive guide. I built it with learning and development. We have somebody who is really well versed in Adobe Captivate, and I think that's the platform she used to make it interactive. I would have just had flowcharts, but I am not technologically gifted in that way.
Sure. Same. Bethany, so one of what Alison was kind of talking about there for a minute was when you have the one-off scenarios, what does retention of those one-offs for future use look like? Do you retain those? Do you, just in case an examiner is like, hey, how'd you get to this? Yeah, this is the scenario that started this conversation. What does that look like for you folks?
Yeah, can you hear me first of all? And this time I've called it on my phone. Okay, great. So we will, if it's in that particular file, we'll of course document everything so that if we have to come back to it, it's right at our fingertips. If anything, we'll update procedures. I have done training before where we've gone through some of the weird scenarios. And so as that training gets refreshed and we do it year over year, we'll just continue adding that to that training material so that folks can take it and retain it. And other than that, email conversations going back and forth, we'll save those. I have a folder in my inbox that's dedicated just to HMDA, so I can keep track of all the weird things that happen. But yeah, those are probably the ways that we'll do it here.
Awesome. All right, Sarah, I'm going to have a question for you now. Have you heard from any of your clients if they're going to try to leverage their HMDA process for either education or actual procedural collection for SBL in any capacity, or are they trying to keep those two things separate?
I haven't heard a lot of them trying to combine. I feel like a lot of the fields will, overlap, but I think it's just at this point kind of too much to try and like jam it all together. And I think it's probably going to be something that gets adjusted as you get used to what you're needing to report, where you're finding that data, who you're getting it from, what department is providing it. It's one of those things that kind of has to, like with the HMDA expansion, it's something that you kind of have to grow with. So I think each place is trying to develop their own way of best getting that data together. And yeah, I just think it's not going to be an easy thing for people to put together because the commercial stuff is so manual and it's so different and it's so specific and odd that it's just a lot. It's a lot of work.
I would agree. And I think that level of complication and the manual process that exists now only gets compounded, right, with the SBL and trying to separate, particularly with like the firewall for collecting GMI. And on the note of GMI, do all of you?
Because that's a problem in itself, so
right.
People don't understand that already.
Right. And so, like, how frequently do you have to go back and say, where was this GMI collected and by whom? Do you see a lot of clients that have that issue? And Alison, Bethany, I'd ask you the same. Do you have to go back later on in the fact and be like, there should have been GMI on this commercial loan, and here's where is it? And I know, Sarah, you referenced missing docs earlier.
Yeah, that happens a lot. It happens a lot. Either it's not completed correctly or they don't specify how the information was provided, which is important. Or they haven't collected it at all. It's a number of issues and none of them are good.
Or the other way, you have an entity borrower and they did collect it, and now you have an ECOA issue.
Mm-hmm.
We're lucky on the commercial side. We are almost exclusively organizational lending. So it's all entities. So it makes GMI very easy on the commercial side. A lot of those individual borrowers are handled in the residential department, even if it's investment property, and they are way more well-versed in collecting GMI.
Yeah, and for us, I mean, it's the same thing. We have very few loans on the commercial side that are actually made to natural borrowers. And I think because they're an anomaly, when the processor is filling out the HMDA information, it kind of jumps out at them. So we thankfully don't have a lot of issues with collecting it or knowing to collect it to report it for HMDA.
One thing I saw historically before we transitioned is a lot of times I would notice when it was an individual and not an entity, it was suspiciously always checked off that it was collected on the basis of visual observation. And so those are sorts of fair lending trends that the examiners are going to look for too. And so that was cause for a refresher, like, hey, even if this is a borrower you've done business with 15 times, you must give them the opportunity to self-identify and not just do it on their behalf, because it looks very suspicious when every loan you have is on the basis of visual observation if it's coming out of the commercial side of the house.
And that's something that, as somebody that reviews the loans, it's very easy to find the pattern. It's not like you're hiding anything, you're, sneaking anything by. We look at all of the loans, we see the patterns. It's not something that is difficult to find. So I know it's trying to make you don't want to really get into it and you're making your life easier, but it is an issue and it's going to be something that a regulator finds very easily when they're doing your reviews.
So
it's also going to be really difficult. Oh, sorry, Tom. I just wanted to add, what also is really difficult is that a lot of times, you'll get an application from a customer who may want to create an entity. So by the time, you get halfway through the deal and now they've established an LLC, but initially they were applying as an individual person or vice versa. They come to you and say, I'm going to create an LLC to hold title to this property. And then they decide, never mind. I'm just going to close it in my own name. So now you've either collected it when you weren't supposed to. Well, I guess you were supposed to at the time, but you no longer have the right to have that GMI information, or you didn't collect it and now you need it. So it's kind of establishing a process catch those and remember to go back and fix the GMI information, if things change throughout the loan process.
So in terms of, any of the either of you or Sarah have a threshold for if there is 10% of your loans, say, with GMI have collected on visual observation, have you established a threshold for when you think it's a concern and more a review of the process? Or is it just kind of, once it doesn't feel right anymore, we're going to go back and revisit this?
We don't have a threshold because the volume is so low.
Yeah.
But it's, to Sarah's point, the LAR, you can put them all together. And if you see all of them in a row, and even if it's just 5 commercial loans in a row, and every single one of them is on the basis of visual observation, which usually is more rare, right? It's more rare to have on the basis of visual observation. So you have 5 commercial loans in a row, and then you get back to the residential, and they're all not on the basis of visual observation. It stands out. And so it doesn't take much for the spidey senses to tingle. It's a technical term.
It's in the reg somewhere in the Q&A. It's fine. All right. Next thing I want to talk about was valuations. So, Alison, I'll start with you. Can you work through the process of valuations, especially for loans that have tax credit implications for us?
Sure. So the good news with this is that it asks for the value of the property relied on in underwriting. It does not ask you for the proper value of the property. And I say that because it can be very difficult to calculate the value of the property at certain times, whether it is, if it is a tax credit, if it's a, commercial warehouse in addition to your residential properties. You could have 15 pieces of collateral securing one loan, and it's the sum of all of those valuations. And so I think that the key is read your loan presentation or your credit write-up or your credit memo, whatever you call it at your bank, and see what credit relied on. What is the value that they assigned that collateral in making the underwriting decision? Even if you later find out there's an error, you say, oh, the appraisal truly said this, but the credit team wrote this in the write-up. What you relied on in underwriting is what they put in that presentation and the board voted on. And so as clear as mud as the value might be, what's in your presentation is going to be your controlling amount there.
Anything to add to that, Bethany?
Actually, yeah. So one thing that I ran into when I first joined Northeastern Savings Bank and going through the commercial HMDA files was that a consultant had actually told our commercial team, as far as determining property value, that they should be relying on the lesser of either the appraised value of the property or the purchase and sales for a purchase transaction. And in the commercial world, that's just not how things work, right? The commercial department doesn't really care what the property is valued at right now. They care about what the property is going to be valued at when whatever project is being done is completed. So this goes back to the whole, don't just force things to fit a certain, process because you follow it on the residential side, or don't manage the exception again. It's look at what you're actually doing and make sure that you're reporting in a way that makes sense. If you take an appraisal and you rely on the as complete value in that appraisal to determine your property value, then report that as your property value. Don't try to force it to fit another mold if that's not what's going to work for your institution.
Oh. All right. Bethany, could you go through and provide us some details on how you balance a manual review versus system-generated aggregation for any particular field, and when you think it's a value not to rely on a system?
Yeah, so I probably would never rely on a system for purpose. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where we're not speaking the same language, right? A purchase, what's something that looks like a purchase to a commercial loan officer or somebody in the underwriting team may not actually meet the definition of a purpose for HMDA. So I don't think, unless something comes out down the road where a system suddenly can differentiate or make it super clear to whoever is inputting that information, I don't think I'd ever rely on that from an automation standpoint. But I think Some things that I have relied on in the past are data that's coming out of the core, like an interest rate, whether a loan is an open-end line of credit, even sometimes like the collateral that's identified, if that's what's identified in your core for for loans that might have multiple pieces of collateral. So there's certain things that I could trust, but then there are other things that I would really need to get into the details and read through it to understand. And purpose is definitely one of those things.
How about like LTV, or how frequently do you manually verify that?
So here, I manually verify it every single time. What's good is that our commercial lending department actually does a great job of putting the LTV into the analysis. So I'm just, I calculate it and make sure that it matches what's in the credit approval memo so that I have a hard and fast place that I can point back to. In the past, I have calculated it and just used that calculation to report for CLTV, which probably doesn't sound kosher, and I'm kind of glad there's no regulators on this call, but I have done that because, again, it's the whole consistency piece. If we're, what I have seen in the past is a commercial team saying, we're going to approve this loan up to 75% LTV. Well, the loan may not be 75% LTV. It may be 72% LTV, and they just didn't write that number down somewhere in the credit approval memo, but that's what it is. So, you end up putting in your loan amount and your property value, and now your LTV is 72%, and you've got an edit that pops up. So, again, it's the whole consistency is key. It's so tough with commercial HMDA because we're trying to force a consumer reg on a commercial area. But, I've done both ways, and I think it just goes back to documenting it, making sure you're doing things consistently, and making sure you can stand behind whatever decision you make for reporting those fields.
That is a very common issue that I find when I'm doing the reviews, is trying to match that to the documents in the file. And it's very rare that it does because of the situation that you said. They'll say, put in the write-up up to 75%, but the LAR will have 72.586, So, and that 72.586 is nowhere documented in the file. So that's something that I have to go back and be like, where did you get this from? Where do you pull that information from? Because this says 75, this is 72, they've got to, like you said, be consistent. And it's never consistent. It's just real. It's a field that is very, very difficult to get that information right and get it documented in a file someplace where someone like myself can actually find it. It's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, that's something we probably want to document in your procedures, but you're right. When you're an outsider trying to look in at a loan file that you're not super familiar with, and you're like, where does this number come from? It can be definitely very difficult.
Do you two get a lot of attempts at claiming that DTI, CLTV don't need to be reported because they're commercial loans for any reason? Right, they're reportable if they accept a couple, like 4 or 5 scenarios, right?
DTI is not reported for commercial.
Right, that's why I said DTI versus CLTV, saying I don't have to do this one because I did the other one.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. I haven't experienced any pushback on it.
Okay. So we're coming up towards 2 o'clock. So I would ask at this point if the 3 panelists have anything in particular that we didn't talk about that they want to bring up for discussion. Start with Alison. Do you have anything before we open it up to the larger audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly, if there's questions, I will yield the floor. But there were, I think, a few key issues that I see come up all the time on the commercial side. We've talked a lot about purpose. One thing that comes up too is the concept of cash out for a future real estate investment. And I know this has been a question and banks have handled it differently. I'd be curious to see how Bethany or Tom, how you guys handle it at your banks, but the reg is clear that you don't need to have a property identified. So if they're taking cash out for a future purchase, to have cash on hand that they can go out and purchase a property if they find one, we do code that as a purchase and we do call it reportable. I know
we are the exact opposite.
Okay.
We say if there is no named property, then we do not report that as a purchase because they could go buy a laundromat. We don't know what they're going to buy. So unless that loan has another purpose to refinance or to improve the property, then we would not report that for HMDA.
So even if the borrower or the applicant at that point, historically is always buying HMDA applicable properties? You're not, okay.
Nope.
I mean, it's hard to make that assumption, really. I mean,
yeah,
it's one of those, like another gray area. It's hard to just jump to the conclusion that, oh, well, they're obviously buying a house with this. It's like, well, maybe they're not. And if it's not detailed in the proposal or the write-up or anywhere in the file, you know, who are you to say? I mean, this is just how I interpret it. It's just, who am I to say that, oh, you're definitely buying a house with this, because that's the pattern. Unless it's clear, it's tough to really come after somebody for that and tell them that they're wrong when you really can't prove that they're right, you know?
So even if you have a commitment or a stated intent from a borrower, I'm going to use this to buy a single family residential for future rental.
Well, no, that in that situation, you've gotten a lot more specific.
Sure.
You know, so you are specifically saying, I am buying an investment property on the Cape for rental.
Yeah.
You know, that in that situation, yes, I would say that would qualify as a purchase.
So would you tie that to a commitment letter that says the purpose, like loan purpose of funds is to buy single family, and make sure that that commitment doesn't allow for the borrower at the last minute to be like, you know what, the video game arcade next to the house I was going to buy looks like a better deal. I'm going to pivot real quick and use that. Do you ever look backwards at that to see, make sure everything went the way it's supposed to?
Yeah. I mean, I look at everything, you know, we read emails, we read proposals, we read notes, read whatever is in there to try and figure out exactly how the deal has started and has finished. So, you know, we read everything. So if they came in the door wanting to buy a rental property on the Cape and they got financing for that, and then it changed along the way, you know, we have to follow that throughout the process as well, with the documents that are in the files. So that's why we really have to kind of play detective and read everything that you've got in there and try and figure out how you ended up where you ended up.
So I do think, you know, consistency is key, and documentation. I think that there's also a lot to, you know, if you read the commentary on HMDA, there are a lot of fields where they say using the best information available, right? We're allowed to rely on stated purpose for an application that never closes. We take them at their word. And so we've taken the position that it's just more conservative to report those as a purchase. We have enough. We've never been questioned on it. But our fear was, if it's an omission, that's, you know, 126 errors in one loan. So we do report them consistently. To your point, if they have a history of, you know, buying various types of property, we're going to ask that question up front. Oh, this is for future real estate. What type of real estate? Oh, I don't know. I'm looking at investment properties that I'm going to rent out to, you know, it's going to be some sort of warehouse. Great. We're not going to report that. If we don't know, though, we do default if they have that history of buying investment properties. You know, we've got 27 loans from them, and they're all single family residents that they're purchasing. We do code that as a purchase.
There's a question in the chat. We've been instructed to report that the property securing the loan funds will be used for. We've been instructed to report the property that is securing the loan where the funds will be used for future investments. Is that correct? Would this be a purchase? Is the other half of the question.
I think I understand the question. So you're saying on the LAR, what do you report? You report all of the fields for the property securing the loan, but the purpose of that loan is to buy other property. Right. So if they're purchasing another residential structure, then yes, that would be a purchase. Right. If it's dwelling secured, but they're purchasing a warehouse, that's not HMDA.
Right. The purpose is what's going to dictate.
From my perspective, from my perspective, if they're using the funds, you know, they're securing it by one dwelling and using the funds to purchase another dwelling. So again, for me, if they don't name the property, then I'm not reporting that loan. But if they do name the property, then it's the same thing. I'm reporting the dwelling that secures the loan and not the dwelling that they're going to buy.
Right.
If they're two different dwellings.
Okay. Without any other questions from the audience, I think Alison has volunteered to share her flow chart that you referenced earlier, right?
Bear with me. I'm going to hope this works because I can outside of the network in order to be on this call, but I'm going to try to screen share from in the network. So can you see a CRA reporting tool? All right. So this is, you know, in our shared drive out on our network. So when people log in, everybody has access to this. And you just click through. So it starts with HMDA, is the property secured by a dwelling? Yes or no. So I'm going to run through it once. Hypothetically, we're going to say yes, it's secured by a dwelling. You know, is the purpose of the loan to purchase, refinance, or improve a dwelling? Keep in mind, this is just for the commercial team. Right. So if I were to say no to this, it's not HMDA reportable. Now I have to go to the next assessment, right? So if I go back, like this. Because if it were other, it's not reportable. If I said yes, it would take me to the next item. Now I will say, is this a revolving line of credit? Part of the reason this is here is we did not report open-end credit. We are now, so this will need to be updated. But so is this a revolving line of credit? Yes, not HMDA reportable because we weren't reporting open-end. I do have this question though, is it secured by multifamily? Because this will also lead you to whether or not it's community development. So say it's an open-end line of credit and it is secured by 5 or more units. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to ask, does it support affordable housing for LMI? Yes. Great. It's not HMDA, it's not CRA, but it is community development.
Alison, where does this report out to? Do you get like an aggregate report of these results, or is it just for the LO or the loan officer at time?
It's just for the loan officer. So, or the CLA, whoever's making that determination. And they use it all the time. They tell me that they use it and that it works. There is a way. So I'm just going to say, no, it's not a dwelling. Great. It's not HMDA. I'd have to continue to CRA. I'm not going to get into the CRA since we're not on a CRA webinar. But at the end, there is an export that they could save all of the decisions they made. So if they said, hey, I used the tool and I got to the end and it said it was CRA, but you're telling me it's HMDA, how come? It won't let me back out. Let me relaunch it entirely. You know, how come? I can audit their answers and say, oh, well, because you answered it this way or you answered it that way.
And you don't require this to be done for every loan, right? It's just
no. It's just a tool that they have access to. So we do not require it on everyone. Most people at this point, I think, have gotten it pretty drilled into their heads. What's HMDA, what's CRA, what's community development. Every once in a while, you get a tricky one, though. And this will walk through. So it walks through the HMDA reportability. It walks through all of the CRA reportability, call report, loan amount, all of that before you arrive at the end result.
Awesome. There is a question in the chat, I think, and thank you for sharing that, Alison. I'm not really sure what the question is. I'm guessing whether or not that's HMDA reportable or not. Y'all take a look at that, but y'all can't see. I'm acting like you can see it. Loan to pay off an existing mortgage. It will be used for the construction of a manufacturing building and cash out of a minimal amount towards closing costs. There's an existing 1 to 4 family house on the property in addition to the new steel building. Is this HMDA? I'm going to guess the question is this HMDA reportable? I'm going to ask the person.
Can you repeat that one more time? So
it's a loan, existing mortgage, fund the construction costs of a manufacturing building and cash out a nominal amount to be used for closing costs. there is an existing 1 to 4 family property, 1 to 4 family house on the property in addition to the new building.
So it's secured by a dwelling
Yep.
and it's paying off a lien. It's
On the dwelling.
satisfying and replacing.
Yeah, I would say that, yes.
Yeah.
If we're misreading that question, person that asked me directly, let me know and we can clarify that. I'm going to take the thank you as no, we did a good job. Okay. I know we have scheduled till 3 o'clock and we intentionally left the full hour, the second hour, for specific questions from the audience. So I would encourage anyone that has them. That is what we are here for. Or unless the panelists have anything that this has sparked that they want to share with the group.
Yeah, again, I don't want to hog all the speaking time if somebody else has something, but I did want to just say that I have a few other hot button issues to discuss. Somebody says, can you discuss construction loan scenarios? So
what about them?
It kind of depends. We could talk all day about construction loans, I think. If you want to get into the minutia of construction loans, so if we, and this is what I do here. So, as I think, again, consistency is key. I just want to throw that out there. If we have a loan, from for a borrower that's what I consider a builder's loan, right? The loan is to purchase vacant land to construct a dwelling for sale. That is not HMDA reportable. If they are constructing the dwelling for investment purposes, that's HMDA reportable as a purchase. What else can we talk about? Oh, the other nuance for me. So sometimes we'll have a loan that says that it's going to be for construction only. But when you get in there and you see the appraisal, and conceivably the appraisal is being written before the loan is originated, so before an action is taken on the loan, and you look at that appraisal and there's a foundation, that's a HMDA reportable loan for a home improvement. So it depends on where we are in the construction phase, if it's already started, if it hasn't. And then it also depends on the long-term purpose of the loan. Is it being held for investments or is it being sold? And then the other piece is construction to perm, in my eyes, is always reportable as a purchase. How's that?
Phenomenal. It's like you rehearsed it.
So if you have a foundation, you're always considering that an improvement?
Assuming that there's no other. Yeah, assuming that there's no other purpose that beats improvement. So let's say, the loan is to purchase, how do I want to put this? So let's say they already own the property and now this loan is for construction only. If there's already a foundation on the property, I would consider that a home improvement loan. If there's no foundation and we're going to dig the hole to put the foundation in, then I would consider that construction only and wouldn't report it.
Interesting. Construction only, but it's not a construction perm, you're saying? Is that why you're saying that?
Right. If it's construction to perm, that's different. If it's construction to perm, then I would report that as a purchase.
Okay. That's what I wanted. I just wanted to make sure you weren't saying that's a home improvement if it's just a foundation.
No. Construction to perm would be purpose. It would be a purchase.
Yeah. And would you treat what if it's a house and they're going to raise it and then build a new one in its spot?
So that's another good one. If they are, in my mind, if they are purchasing a plot of land that has a dwelling on it, it's a purchase. Whether or not they're going to raise the structure, rip it out, and build a new one, I have seen it go both ways. I've seen the argument that they're going to rip out the structure, and and then they're building it as construction only, and it doesn't meet the definition. That's where I err on the side of caution, and I say there's a dwelling there. When we make the purchase, it's a purchase.
And I would say we would do the same, and I would use the argument or the scenario of COVID. You bought it with the intention to rip it down, but all of a sudden everybody's home for a year and can't build or do construction. It stays like that for the remainder of that time that's purchased. If we modify a HMDA loan with new money included, how would we handle this for the LAR?
Who wants to take it?
So we wouldn't report modification. Modifications are not HMDA reportable. We don't do business in New York. I know there's some weird New York rule about a New York schema, and so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. We're in Massachusetts and other New England states other than New York, so we would say it's not HMDA reportable.
I would
agree.
Yeah. So we don't need to report the new money.
No, if it were a CRA loan, you would, but HMDA, you do not.
Yeah, just
Right.
completing HMDA with zero.
Unless you're replacing your entire original HMDA loan, right, with the new money added, that's a different conversation. But if it's just a straight modification, then no.
Yeah, if you're not replacing that lien with a new lien, then it's not a refinance, so a modification doesn't get reported. You're just modifying the same loan, just adding money to it, or taking funds out. That is modification, not reportable for HMDA purposes.
No problem.
It's really tricky with the construction loans, Bethany. Just to go back to your foundation, is when you've got money in the foundation, right? So you've got foundation and the house is framed, and they ran out of money, and now they need to get a new loan because they need more money to finish the house. Is that a purchase or a home improvement loan? Because the house isn't fully constructed yet.
Right. And well, I would probably still, it depends. If they're going to do a construction to perm, I'd probably still call it a purchase. If they're taking out another loan to finish the house, I'd call it a home improvement. If they're refinancing, if they're going to refinance that lien, was there a dwelling there when they initially took out the loan? That's going to dictate whether or not it's a refinance or a purchase or a home improvement. So very confusing.
Okay, next one. Well, now we're getting more questions. Good job, team. Reporting income. Instructions say to use gross income on the LAR. We do not use gross income in making our decisions. The gross amount appears nowhere in the presentation. Our decisions are made based on cash flow, and we are consistent reporting this with the global amount on the LAR. What does everyone else do? Use the amount that was used to make your underwriting decision.
But I would also say if the loan is not to a natural borrower, then I would be reporting NA in the income field. I would not be reporting income at all if it's to
Oh yeah, no, I would agree on that. I was reading that as it was an individual because you're collecting and using that income. But if other than that, no.
Before we had, to your point, we used to have individual borrowers on the commercial side, and we would use the gross annual rents to calculate the debt service coverage ratio, and that was it. We were not looking at income. And we were consistently using the total rents as that number, because that's what you relied on in underwriting.
Okay. The question was related to the natural person or borrower. To use the amount. I think we all agree, right? Use the amount. Any amount that you use to underwrite it is what you're reporting. The NA would be.
Unless it's multifamily 5+ units, then it's NA.
Yes. The caveats are key. The question from Megan, under the impression that if the line of work in this instance is not related to the purchase or the investment of the property, then it's considered consumer and not business purpose.
So that depends entirely, because actually Reg Z is going to be your controlling regulation here, because that's what HMDA and the commentary references. So if somebody is purchasing, even if they're purchasing an owner-occupied 4-unit, it's considered business purpose because regulation says so. It does not matter that it's not their primary occupation. There are areas, though, so if it's a refinance, or it's, say, they're purchasing, if it's a refinance of a 2-bedroom or a 2-unit rather, it gets more gray. And certainly if it's non-owner occupied property and it's a purchase, it's always investment. It's always business purpose, regardless of their profession. I have a chart for that too.
The charts are awesome. Graphics are fun.
We also have to look at who the borrower is too, right? If the borrower is an entity, then it's going to be business purpose. An entity can't occupy a dwelling. So even if it's a mixed use property and they're going to occupy the business unit, the business itself cannot occupy a dwelling, right? It has to be a natural person to occupy the dwelling. I don't know if I just made that worse enough, but.
Another purpose this decision comes with evaluating changes in entities, partner buyouts, entity changes, trust ownerships, etc. How do all of you handle that? In terms of what, I guess would be my question, in terms of the purpose decision about whether or not you include other purposes other than the purchase and refi? Like, we talking about other purchases coming in here?
So
Yeah, that's,
yeah, I was just gonna say a lot of times if it's a partner buyout, for example, you already own it, right? It's similar as it would be on the residential side, which is it's not a purchase if you're already owning it and you're just buying more of the share. Right? If you're already on the deed, it's not a purchase. I don't know if that's the question you're getting at though.
yeah, and again, we're looking also for the common borrower if we're talking about a refinance. So if it's, you know, Alison and I own a business together and I'm buying her out, am I refinancing the loan to take her off of it? Like, was it in both of our names or was it in the name of our business? And then it kind of depends on what the nature of the transaction is.
Like you could consider it as like a divorce buyout on the residential side. You know, it's pretty much the same concept.
Right? Even if it's a deed, so you can't just say, oh, there's a deed involved, but to the point of it's a buyout. So Bethany and I own property together, and Bethany and I then deed it to just Bethany because she's getting the property and I'm being bought out. That's still not a transfer of ownership. It's a change of ownership type from joint ownership to solely held. It doesn't change the fact that Bethany already owned the property.
How does everybody report when we have addresses that are like 10-12 Main Street? I'm not sure how many of you are also subject to earlier. This year or last year, we got the email like, you need to clean that up.
Yeah, we're cleaning that up. So we would have reported it in the past as 10-12, and now we're making the change to pick one or the other. I probably need to do a little bit more digging myself to better understand what the requirement is there, but I would kind of look at it the same way as I would look at two separate buildings. If I had a 10 Main Street and a 12 Main Street, I'd pick one and report it. So I'm thinking you could use the same logic here, but I'm willing to be corrected. So
Yeah, it depends and it's hard to tell. So because the guidance, the HMDA Getting It Right guide specifically talks about postal addresses. And so if the address, like I'm thinking about, I was born and raised in New York City, the addresses were often something dash something, but it was one building. That's just the address for that building. In that sort of scenario, we would report it. If you have 3 properties, and I've seen this a lot on the commercial side, it's it's 6, 8, and 10 Main Street. Pick one and report it.
How about if you have a lot with no address yet? So development.
So were you going to jump in, Bethany?
either one. Either one. I have an answer for it, but if you want to answer it, go for it.
This is what that CFPB email last year was all about, was the fact that if you have a lot, there are certain fields, such as the street address, and I believe the city, that have to be reported as NA per the CFPB. The state code, I believe, is a little different because it's reported as both the property location as well as the census tract location. So that one still gets reported. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bethany. But I think it's just the city and the property address that are NA when it's just the lot number. You still have to report the census tract information.
Yeah, I thought it was NA for the entire address, but I would have to go back and look at the guidance to make sure. But you are correct as far as the geocoding, it still needs to be geocoded first.
Yeah,
the only other thing I would add.
Zip is also NA.
Sorry.
I think Zip, it was just it's the city and the state, right? That stay. And the census tract. Because at the end of the day, that's what they really gets utilized for analysis down the road anyway.
Right. The only other thing that I would add, and this is something that we're still working on fixing these lot addresses ourselves, is to look at the documentation. And this is more for us on the residential side. I haven't seen this on the commercial side yet, but one thing that we noticed when we were going back and scrubbing loans that we had initially reported a lot address on is that the deed ended up naming an address. So, you know, the rule is that if you have a named address, you report it. And if you don't, that's when you're reporting the NA. So if you have a way to determine whether a named address was, well, whether an address was named, you know, maybe in the deed or a closing instrument, just to make sure that you're reporting that and not just blanket reporting NA because it initially said lot.
I think I just want to go back. I know I missed a few questions during that conversation. How do you calculate CLTV when you are purchasing a dwelling and also have a second lien on 2 other separate properties? That are they? So
for us,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Nope.
Okay. So CLTV is the combined loan to value ratio, right? So I am going to look for all of the liens against that property and all of the properties securing the lien. I'm looking at it from both sides. So for me, I would do that full calculation. So we've actually, you know, we've had that scenario where we've got 2 different loans that are in our credit approval memo, and both loans are secured by 3 properties, the same 3 properties. I'm going to report the total value of those properties, and I'm going to report my CLTV based off of the total loan amount over the property value. And I should clarify, I'm reporting the property value that's securing my loan, but when I'm calculating the CLTV, I'm calculating it based off of all of the liens and all of the collateral involved.
Correct. Same. I know Debbie put in the chat too, folks, the residential program from the other day. This was largely commercial, but obviously some fields and data remain consistent between the types. But I think that's all the questions I do see in the chat.
I think, did we miss the 2-family purchase renting out the larger unit? I think we missed a question.
Okay. Is that a Megan question?
Yes.
And we had an LLC that purchased 2 families where he is renting out the larger unit and occupying rent-free the smaller unit. Is this business or consumer?
I would say that if it's an LLC, that if your borrower is the LLC, it's a business purpose one.
Yeah. So yeah, it has to be, right? You're not a, I think all 4 of us in agreement. Sarah, Alison too, yeah.
My one question there though is, it's a 2-family. Are they using that larger unit for a business, or are you saying that they're living in it? Because I actually read that question differently when I read it through the first time, and I was thinking about whether or not it's HMDA reportable or not at all, because, you know, are they working out of that larger unit, and so the majority of the square footage of the property is being used for a business and not a dwelling at all?
Excellent point.
Megan, if you want to clarify that, we can try to give you some more guidance, but.
And
the only other thing I would say, folks, you got 36 days, so you have to file if you're not ready to do it yet. I know we're sure as heck not close to it. If you have questions, I would refer back to this as well as the MMBA's residential program from the other day. It sounds like so they're living in the smaller unit and not sure if it's commercial or residential for the large unit.
So that would have been my first question, though. I would look at what they're using that other unit for. If they're just renting it out to somebody, then yes, it's a commercial purpose under reportable loan. But if it's the majority of the rents or square footage, remember on the commercial side, you can use either approach and you don't have to use the same one every time. Internally, we have a process of saying, calculate it both ways, and whichever one says it's not HMDA reportable, go with it. And
that's
so
what we recommend as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Again, making your life a little bit easier. So.
What if it has a shared kitchen that's in the larger unit, but you're living in the smaller unit? We're going to reallocate based on how one accesses the other half. we have. So I live in a town. I live in a
units, I mean,
shared resource space at this point for housing, and it gets weird.
yeah, then we have to go back to the definition of a dwelling and determine if it's still a dwelling if there's no kitchen or whatever the components are that make it a dwelling.
All right. Do not include commercial as part of the total units, right? Because the commercial unit, you're not living in,
Correct.
it's not the dwelling unit. The units is just for the dwelling.
Yeah, that was a common issue I've seen for reporting the number of units. The commercial team wants to include all of the units. I'm like, nope, just the residential units. That's all HMDA cares about. That and multifamily affordable. That's the other one that trips people up all the time, because if you have multifamily affordable units, they're like, oh, well, we're going to say this is affordable housing for CRA purposes, as a community development loan, because it's naturally occurring, but that's not what the HMDA rule asks. It really talks about units that are specifically reserved for low and moderate income individuals. So you're talking about deed restricted units or project-based housing when you're talking about multifamily affordable.
I also find that field is incorrectly reported often, just because say that you're taking 3 different properties as collateral. You're reporting the total units and all the collateral properties, so it could be like 7, but each individual property does not qualify as a multifamily, but they're still putting 0 in that field. And, that has to be adjusted for the actual properties, not just the total number of units. And that trips up a lot of people as well.
Yeah, the other thing I've seen too with affordable housing is people reporting Section 8 vouchers as being affordable housing. Section 8 does not make a property affordable housing. Section 8 goes with the tenant and not with the property. So just because the landlord is going to accept Section 8 does not make that house or that property affordable housing.
Right. It would only be affordable if they're saying units 5 and 6 are reserved exclusively for people that have Section 8 vouchers.
Right.
Correct.
Do you struggle to find or locate if there's multifamily affordable units? I assume you mean like in the write-up. I'm not sure if that's what you're going at, but we have a special spot on our form, or I guess it's not a form anymore, it's in a system that straight out asks that now.
I usually find it to be pretty clear in the appraisal.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have it in a set form, but it's in the appraisal, and it's almost always in the write-up, because they have set rent, right? And they're deed restrictions. And anytime you have a deed restriction, it impacts title. And so it's usually pretty prominently noted. It's not going to surprise you, unlike naturally occurring affordable housing, which is not reportable here.
I think we've also drilled into them the whole community development and CRA aspect of things, that they like, it jumps out at them now too, and they're usually pretty good about reporting it or identifying it anyway.
So I see a lot of requests for my checklists and all of my cheat sheets here. I'm happy to share what I can. I don't know that I can share my interactive checklist because it's built into our system. It's not a document that I can just mail out. As far as the business purpose, that I can certainly share, and I'm going to be completely honest here and say all I did was I took a couple of slides from Patty Joyner and I altered them. So they're not even mine, they're Patty Joyner's, and she's even better than I am. So you're welcome. I will get those. I don't know if the best way to do that is to get them to Debbie and we can disseminate
yes,
them that way.
please.
Okay. And don't rely on them. Here's my attorney disclaimer. Don't rely on them and then blame me. They haven't been vetted by anybody. They're just a useful tool. At the end of the day, especially when you're talking about business purpose, it is a totality. Somebody mentioned the totality of the facts and looking at the circumstances. Internally, we always say, if it's gray, we actually default to consumer, because consumer is the greatest level of protection. And that's typically when you see individuals, we get a lot of this comes up more on our residential side of house, to be honest with you, than commercial, where you have an individual buying investment property, but they're not, a landlord beyond the purchase, right? They come, they refinance it, or they, where does that land them? So you got to look to Reg Z, and it is I think there's 8 separate criteria, and none of them are conclusive. So you have to make your own decision based on the totality and just document it. Why'd you say that? I think that's the key with everything. I think I said it about 15 times. Documentation and consistency.
Yes, garbage in, garbage out. Again, those documentation tools, I think, self-developed. I would also argue if you have the capacity to pull in folks that are actually doing the work to opine on where the disconnect is, that is something that can be extremely valuable at the institutional level.
And I do have to say, just as a little recommendation, if you have someone or a company like Quilty and Associates or whoever you use that comes in and does HMDA scrubs for you, HMDA reviews for you, if you have a loan that you're not sure about, that's kind of weird, falls into that gray area, bring that file to them. Don't try and hide it because we will pull that file. I don't know how we do it, but we will select it. I don't know how many times I've sent over the selections and they're like, oh, we were hoping you wouldn't look at that one. That's not why I'm here. We're there to help you. We're here to help you figure it out. We'll talk it through together. We'll look at the regulation. We'll try and figure it out to the best of our ability. But if you have somebody like that you have hired and have brought in, they should be there for you as a resource as well. So, don't try and kind of slip that through the cracks. That's your opportunity to really get clarification on some of the stuff that you're kind of struggling with.
And considering I'm about to go into a HMDA DIR in about 2 weeks, I can also attest that if your auditor or consultant doesn't pull it, the examiners will, and then you'll find
somebody will find it.
Yeah, the other audit documentation. So,
and to that point, there are a lot of really good resources. I think that in general, compliance officers and what have you at least across the state of Massachusetts are all really good at working as part of a team and happy to share resources. Also, the HMDA Getting It Right guide is, a frequent go-to. There are some paid for subscriptions out there in the world. There's a whole, company devoted just to HMDA that has an answer person that's fairly affordable. We use that when I get stumped. There's the CFPB. You can always submit an email to the CFPB. They're not the fastest to get back to you, but eventually they do. And so to the point of getting it right, it's much easier to get it right at the outset while you're doing your scrub than waiting for it to be pulled by your auditor or the examiner.
And somebody did ask in the group about CRA training versus HMDA. There is another group that exists out there that meets every Monday for an hour to talk about CRA and the revised rule. If anybody is interested, I will share my email in the chat, ask me about it, and I can send you information about how to get involved in that, particularly with modernization looming. Do your loan officers complete LAR on your analyst? I would say for us, the loan officers are supposed to. Often it's someone in the back, myself included, backfilling, which back to my earlier comment about when GMI is collected. I don't know, Alison, Bethany, same with you. Most of the time they're supposed to, but sometimes it's missed.
Yeah, I think for us, it's more of our processors, the assistants to the commercial loan officers that are compiling the data. They have a worksheet that they fill out and they go through to identify if the loan's HMDA reportable, though the loan officer is also supposed to be giving input. And then as far as deciding when it's HMDA reportable or not, I'll also pull a report at the end of the quarter of all of the commercial loans that were originated. And I try to also grab a report of all of the adverse loans for the quarter and go through them to determine if we have any omissions.
Yeah, so similar. The loan officer, we don't ask them to scrub the HMDA LAR. It's not going to happen. We have them in Loan Vantage. There is like a HMDA screen, and we ask them to fill that out. That drives the HMDA reportability. And if they get stumped, that's actually why we created that internal tool to determine whether it was HMDA reportable. Was they were having a lot of errors even with that screen in Loan Vantage. So we do ask that the loan officers figure out whether it's HMDA reportable up front because of the demographic collection, right? That's supposed to be something that's done at application. And so having them be able to identify whether or not something is HMDA or CRA or none of the above, we do put on the loan officers. It is our CLAs after the fact that are then scrubbing the data and putting it into the system before compliance reviews it. And I'm impressed that Bethany, you said you're sampling residential. We're still scrubbing 100% of our loans, every field, even on residential.
I should add for us for residential, I mean, our volume's a lot smaller, but we also have somebody in the first line that does 100% scrub. So as second line, I'm only scrubbing a portion for residential, but I'm still doing 100% commercial. Because there's somebody else in there that's doing, there's the processors and the underwriters that are pulling the data in, then we've got somebody that's doing 100% review, and then I'm doing a sampling of that. So yes, not without its resources.
We're doing 200% review. We do have a first line. Our comfort there is not quite there yet on the compliance review, though. We haven't moved to sampling yet. But my question to you would be, when did you feel comfortable? I'm with you. I don't know that it'll ever happen on the commercial side, but at what point do you feel like, oh, we can move to sampling? What's your accuracy threshold before you're willing to say this team's got it?
Yeah, I don't know if I have an exact threshold. I've only been with Easton Savings Bank for about 15 months. So when I came on board, there was somebody here that's dedicated to HMDA and fair lending. And she does a fantastic job scrubbing. She really knows her stuff. So I trust her and I trust the work that she does. And when I pull my samples, I'm not finding issues that are systemic by any means. So I'm comfortable that even the errors, if I do find an error, that it's a one-off thing. Somebody, clicked a button somewhere and changed the field inadvertently, but it's not indicative of a systemic issue. Certainly, if I did start finding significant issues, then I'd either expand the sample or go to 100%. But just based off of what I'm finding, I don't feel the need to do it.
That makes sense. And I'll give the caveat. I'm not trashing our first line here. We've had 8 mergers in the past, or 7 mergers in the past 8 years. So there's constant change. And every time we get to a point where I'm like, we're great, we can move to a sample methodology. Even on the commercial side, we've been close. Something changes. And anytime you have change, you have risk. And so from a risk-based perspective, we just haven't gotten there yet.
And there was a question about what LOS systems y'all use and they have two-way data transfer.
I don't know what two-way data transfer is.
I don't know what that means either.
We both use Loan Vantage, but I mean, I know for us, and this might just be what we do here, I know that we are manually inputting all of our loans into QuestSoft. I don't know if the question is there about whether it speaks to the loan reporting software, but I know we manually input, though, there may be a feed, I'm not sure.
We, even as our assetizer, are currently manually compiling and entering commercial HMDA.
So we do not. We did automate that. There is a Loan Vantage HMDA extract, and we were using QuestSoft, which did not have an integration. And so what we did was we created a database that converted it into a file that QuestSoft would read. So you downloaded it out of Loan Vantage and you converted it into a mapping software. We're moving to a different vendor now, and they have a dynamic importer that allows us to just map directly out of LoanVantage. So it's still an export and then an import. It's not automatic like you can do on the, we use Encompass on the residential side, and that's a lot easier. But it is automated.
Okay, so Megan, to add to that, her question, the upload from core, we transfer commercial relationship information into the LOS for reporting purposes. I would caution you on that in case some of that information changes between when it was put into core versus when he goes to that loan application.
Yeah, I can second that. We have seen that before where it goes into core, like especially with interest rate, for example. If the index changes, the rate that you're pulling out of core may no longer be what the interest rate was at the time that the loan was originated. So just be mindful if you have anything tied to an index.
And I would also caution you on using older data. We had an applicant whose GMI changed between application and closing. And that creates a very unique scenario. I mean, it was a very isolated instance, but it was something that existed. So we had to pay a little bit more attention to how we processed that.
So I think I understand the two-way data transfer based on Janine's answer, which was having Abrigo and generating a CSV file that goes into Quessoft, but not back to Abrigo. So yes, nothing that I'm aware of can go from Quessoft or Risk Exec or CRA Wiz, any of those. I don't think any of them then flow back into your LOS. You would have to manually, if you find a problem, you have to manually update it in your LOS or in your core, where however else you're managing it. So, which is good. I think the idea of that if you could force things to update in your LOS using something like Risk Exec or Quessoft, that would be scary to me.
Yes. Well, with 15 minutes left in our plan session, I want to thank the three panelists. You've been excellent. I appreciate it. I know the audience as well received an inordinate amount of information. So thank you all for your time. And nobody has anything else, I will say thank you and have an excellent afternoon, and pass it to Debbie.
And thank you so much for our panel again, Tom, for organizing everyone. I will be sending out a link for this recording as well as any other information that my panelists think that would be beneficial for you to have. And remember, I will be sending it to the one person at the company that I have that registered everyone. So, you know, so check with that person, but I'll send it out as soon as I can upload the recording. So thanks so much. And you have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.